Thank you, Soar President. And next we will have Janelle Harmon, who is President of the Mercer County Jack and Jill.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Janelle Harmon, President of the magnificent Mercer County chapter of Jack and Jill of America. I thank you for joining us tonight for this important conversation. I'd also like to thank President Dr. Holmes and the Trenton Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated for partnering with us on this meaningful forum. Home ownership has long represented opportunity, stability, and generational wealth. Yet, inequities in this appraisal process continue to create barriers for many families. So, tonight's conversation is an opportunity to learn and build awareness and gain tools and resources to help advocate for fairness in housing. So, we are honored to have such knowledgeable speakers with us this evening. And I hope tonight's conversation inspires continued dialogue and action in our community. So, again, thank you for being here, and I look forward to a powerful and informative program.
Thank you so much, Janelle. We're so happy to be partnering with Jack and Jill on this. And next we will have Kenita Bullock, who is also a member of Jack and Jill and our Trenton Alumni chapter. And then following that, we will have Anita Wimple.
Hello, good evening, everyone. And as you all know, this topic is near and dear to my heart for several reasons. But as Chapter President Janelle mentioned, it's really the core of our generational wealth. How you transfer the equity and asset of your home to the next generation is really important. And quite frankly, no one has been talking about this topic. So, again, kudos to the team that first thought it not robbery to bring this conversation to not only Delta, but Jack and Jill in partnership, because as women, we often are managing a household, but we also have to pivot and think about how do we manage household wealth. So, really proud to be a part of the team here today. And I know you're in for a treat. We have some amazing women that are going to speak from their professional background, and we have to share this information. Do not let our conversation tonight just sit with you and your family. We are charged individually to make sure we're sharing it with others. So, again, so excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
All right. Thank you, Kenita. Thank you to everyone who did the welcome. My name is Anita Wemple. I'm the chair of Social Action, and I also have some of the team on. So thank you for joining us. So I will not repeat the things that was already said. It is a very important webinar so that we can then, see what's going on with the housing piece. So without further ado, so I do bring you greetings from Social Action. And so part of my job is to announce Verlina. And so we will show a video. But let me just tell you a little bit about Verlina. She is no stranger to any of us, as she is our Assemblywoman. And she is a product of Trenton Public School System and has obtained advanced degrees in Trenton at Trenton State College, which is the College of New Jersey, and earned a Master of Science in Administration from Central Michigan University. Her career as a social worker, coupled with a commitment to public service, led her to elected position of East Ward Councilwoman, where she became the first African-American female to serve in that position, and Council Vice President, where she legislated laws from the city of Trenton. Assemblywoman Verlina Reynolds proudly served 7.5 years on city council before being elected to fill the vacant New Jersey Assembly seat in the 15th district legislative district. Assemblywoman Reynolds-Jackson is currently serving her 5th term in the New Jersey Assembly and has ascended to senior leadership. She serves as chair of the Assembly Education Committee, vice chairwoman of the Assembly Appropriations Committee, and a member of the Assembly Budget Committee. Assemblywoman Reynolds-Jackson also serves as co-chair of the Joint Committee on Public Schools. She is a member of the Assembly Budget Committee and the Assembly of Children, Families, and Food Security Committee. Assemblywoman also serves as a commissioner on the State of New Jersey Martin Luther King Jr. Commission, the Amistad Commission, and is chair of the New Jersey Legislative Black Caucus. And she's also a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. So we are super proud of her and all the work that she's doing and here to support this cause. So without further ado, I will introduce, we can show the video. Thank you.
We can't hear.
Apologies. Good evening, everyone. But of course, the daylight sunshine is still here. I apologize that I'm not able to be with you all. I'm Assemblywoman Verlina Reynolds-Jackson. You know, tonight we're having a fair value forum and we're talking about understanding home appraisals and discrimination. And I'm so grateful to the Trenton Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, who is hosting this in partnership with Mercer County Chapter of Jack and Jill of America. Now, this is very important to all of us when we talk about ending the wealth gap. So right now, I'm here on Wilkerson Place where I grew up at. This is row homes of all single family homes. There are renters here, there are homeowners here. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we protect the value that is in those homes. And so tonight we're going to have a valuable conversation around what does that look like? What does discrimination look like? What does the appraisals and surveyors? And I want our young people to think about even careers outside of real estate sales. But what about being an appraisal? What about being a surveyor? We need these people to be a part of the real estate industry to make sure that our properties are valued, that the discrimination, we begin to dismantle the system that is there that devalues our homes. And we want to have this open conversation about what's happening. And so this isn't just an urban issue in Trenton, but it's happening throughout the country. We want to make sure that we understand it, and we have laws and protections out there that we should be able to assess. So we have a great line of panelists here tonight. Thank you all for coming, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care now. Good evening, everyone. But of course, the daylight.
We're so grateful for those words from our SOAR and our assembly person, Verlina Reynolds-Jackson. Next, we will have an introduction of our first speaker.
Anita? Kanita, you're on mute, I think.
Yes, 1 second. Thank you. Pulling it up. Okay, so apologies for the delay, but I'm excited to introduce Ms. Taraun Tice McKnight. She's an attorney who owns and manages the law office of Taraun Tice McKnight Esquire LLC, a boutique real estate law firm that specializes in commercial and residential real estate transactions, both. She has over a decade of experience in real estate law and remains passionate about assisting first-time homeowners navigating the process of home ownership. Taraun also serves as a deputy county administrator for Mercer County government, where she uses her unique combination of legal, policy, and program skills to support Mercer County's most vulnerable populations. Previously, she served as senior policy advisor to former Governor Chris Christie as well as and associate counsel to Governor Phil Murphy. Taraun strongly believes in the intentional progression of Black women and focuses to pursue that through her nonprofit. Pardon me, the New Jersey Black Women's Collective, of which she is the co-founder and co-president. Taraun is a graduate of Temple University and Rutgers School of Law, Newark, as well as a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. She resides in Trenton with her husband, Samuel, and 2 children, Jameson and Samuel Jr. I'm proud to introduce Taraun Tice McKnight.
Thank you, Kenita. Thank you for the introduction. I'm really grateful to be here today. As was mentioned before, this is a really critical conversation. So to be here with you all is a great honor. And I'm just excited to share my perspective, some experiences that I have, my expert opinion on real estate law, and in addition to engaging with some dialogue with you all at the end of our presentations, and also learning from our fellow panel members. So we're in for a treat. I'm happy to share. So if you just give me a second, I'm going to share my screen so that you all can see the presentation. All right, so give me a thumbs up if everyone can see. Awesome, awesome. So as mentioned, Taraun Tice McKnight, I am the sole practitioner and manager of the law office of Taraun Tice McKnight, and my focus is primarily real estate, and we specialize in both real estate for commercial and residential transactions. So the perspective that we're speaking about today is from this perspective of a transactional attorney, which is a very unique position because your transactional attorneys are those that are most in tune to what's happening throughout your transaction during the actual transaction. So I want to talk a little bit about that role before we jump right in so that you can understand the perspective in which I'm speaking. Again, as a transactional attorney for real estate transactions, my primary job is to be the contract expert, right? Generally, you need to know the contract inside and out so that you can properly enforce that contract. And when we're talking about appraisals, it's very important that your attorney is able to enforce whatever appraisal clause that is included in that contract. Second, as I mentioned before, your transactional attorneys, we're working on the front end of this transaction versus the back end. We do not litigate. And when I'm saying litigated, it's those that go into the courts to represent you in certain matters. Your transactional attorneys are those, particularly in a real estate transaction, that's going to be with you to enforce that contract, to make sure the clauses are there that are favorable to your client, and to get that client to the closing table without any liability. The third, as I mentioned, is again ensuring that contract is favorable to the client. In particular, when we're talking about appraisals, it's very important that there are clauses in contracts that are giving your client flexibility. One, flexibility to negotiate the terms of the contract if that appraisal value is not favorable. And 2, making sure they have an exit strategy. Very important. Third is enforce contract terms, as we mentioned throughout the transaction. And lastly is making sure we ride that very delicate line of getting your client to the closing table versus potentially having to be involved in derailing the closing because of appraisal matters. So that's the primary position of the transactional attorney. And I'll talk you through what that process looks like. But before we do that, I want to make sure everyone that we're on the same page when it comes to what an appraisal is, just to have some general understanding of what that is. So an appraisal is a professional opinion of a property's market value prepared by a licensed appraiser. And when we talk about market value, I want to make sure that definition is also clear. When we're talking about a property's market value, we're talking about the value of that property as it's going to be sold on the open market under normal circumstances. Okay. And that is prepared by a professional appraiser. So a couple points in regards to the appraisal that I think is key to this conversation. One is that an appraisal is the lender's choice. It's very important to know that because it's going to give us a lot of context as the discussion moves on. The appraisal is not the choice of the buyer or the seller. And when I say that, I mean the buyer or the seller is not responsible for picking up the phone to call the appraisal, to make the appointment to say, hey, I'm hiring you to conduct my appraisal. That is the sole responsibility of the lender. Because why? As to point two, the appraiser really is to protect the lender. Yes, on the back end, the buyer and the seller, we see benefits, particularly the buyer. We talk about generational wealth. We're talking about wealth in general to that particular individual or family. Those are all long-term benefits of an appraisal. But up front, the appraisal is to benefit the lender. The lender has to make sure that whatever money that they're lending for a mortgage, if there's a mortgage involved, that that property is not underwater. And when we say underwater, we're talking about the value of the property. It should, your purchase price should align or be uh, lower than the actual value of the house. So this is to protect the lender to make sure that the buyer that they're providing a mortgage to, they're not purchasing a house that is a bad investment for the bank. Because remember, when you buy a property, you are the owner of title. And there is a lien against that property until the mortgage is satisfied. So the bank has just as much interest in this property as you do. Okay. The third is an appraisal is based on market data and the property's condition. So we'll talk more about what comparables are in market data, but it really is based on where the market is driven. What are the comparables in that particular neighborhood? What are the similarly situated properties that we're comparing your property to? That is what it's based off. Unfortunately, it's not based on subjective opinions, and we'll talk about that. It's not based on the opinions of the seller or the buyer. The purpose is to be solely focused on the market data and the condition of the property. And this is not to be confused with a home inspection, right? Some people mix up the idea of home inspections versus appraisal inspections because both there is an inspection that's attached to the process. But it's not a home inspection. The home inspection is when you yourself, as a buyer, you're calling to find out and finding a home inspector to come out to do an inspection of your home to really figure out the condition of your home so that you can properly plan for and budget for the things that you want to do with your home. It is not a contingency of your mortgage, right? The appraisal is the contingency of your mortgage. So I wanted to make that clear that we don't mistake the home inspection with the appraisal. So that's Appraisal 101. Very short, very sweet to the point. It's a professional opinion on the property's market value prepared by a licensed appraiser. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about the impact of an appraisal. The impact is vast, right? The appraisal is very important to the transaction. One, it's important to your loan approval. And I've just mentioned that your appraisal, your purchase of your property is contingent upon a satisfactory appraisal. Well, what does that mean, Taraun? That means if you're purchasing a home and you're requesting a mortgage, the mortgage company is going to say, yeah, sure, I'll give you a mortgage. However, there has to be a satisfactory appraisal that's attached. And generally, you will not get a loan commitment for that mortgage if you do not have an appraisal. There are exceptions, of course, but generally 99% of the time, whenever you're mortgaging funding for the purchase of a home, whether it's commercial or whether it's residential, there is an appraisal attached. So it's very important to the process, very important to your real estate transaction and guaranteeing that mortgage to your home. The second is purchase price negotiations. So whenever there is negotiations between a buyer and a seller, the appraisal matters. It simply does, because there are times during your transactions that your purchase price may have to be negotiated. One instance is when you're purchasing a property, there's your listing price. And generally, buyers are thinking, well, my listing price will equal the value of my home. But that's not always the case. So if you are purchasing a home and you later find out that the appraisal value is less than your purchase price, that is a huge impact on your transaction because there could be a time where myself, as the attorney, I'm negotiating with the seller's attorney to figure out how do we renegotiate this purchase price so that it aligns with the appraisal price. The important part to know is that appraisal price generally should align with your purchase price unless the appraisal price is more. That's equity. That's a great thing, right? So just want to make the point of your purchase price can be impacted by that appraisal. Sometimes it can go down and be favorable to the buyer. Third is refinancing terms. If you're refinancing your home, if you're pulling equity, that appraisal matters so very much. It can impact the terms of your refinance. It can impact your interest rate. It can impact how much money that you plan to pull if you're pulling any money out of that property. The appraisal, the value of that property is a key determinant in a lot of factors, specifically the terms of refinancing agreements. And last is the buyer's cash to close requirements. So you're purchasing a home, 9 times out of 10, you have closing costs. And if the appraisal value does not equal to your purchase price, there are times where your closing costs will be increased. You'll have to pay much more than you thought you would prior to entering this transaction. So let me give you a quick example. You're purchasing a home for $100,000. And you're just thinking, okay, I'll have my mortgage and whatever the closing costs are, maybe a couple $1,000s, we're good with paying that. However, your appraisal comes back at $90,000. Your mortgage company does not care who's filling that gap, that $10,000 gap, but they're going to be looking for someone to fill that gap. And sometimes it's the seller who'll say, I'll fill the gap. And other times it's the buyer who'll say, well, if I want this home, I'm going to have to suck this up. I'm going to have to fill the gap myself. Therefore, they'll be paying an additional $10,000 that will be added on to their closing costs because of the value of the property that was appraised during the time of the appraisal. So it can greatly impact your cash to close and your buying requirements. So just want to highlight for you all these 4 important ways in which the appraisal can impact a transaction. So let's jump into the process. And this is important as we move along. Generally, when you enter a contract, you're going to go through an attorney review period. And your attorney review period is going to be a time in which you can add clauses to the contract that's going to be favorable to you. And as an attorney, I'm throwing in all types of clauses. I'm making sure that my clients are well prepared. They have flexibility in their contracts. They're able to escape if they need to. But most importantly, for relevance to this particular form, we're adding in contingencies about the appraisal. One of the key clauses that we're putting in the contract is if the appraisal does not rise to the level of the purchase price, we have the negotiation. There's a negotiation between the buyer and the seller. And if you can't resolve itself, either party can terminate the deal. So when that happens, you want to make sure that you have a contract that is solid, that it gives you flexibility and gives you an exit strategy. After the contract is negotiated and you're officially in contract, you finish attorney review. Most likely you're starting your mortgage application. And your lender is going to ask, okay, well, now it's time for the appraisal. They're going to order the appraisal. They're going to coordinate with your realtor on when it's a good time to come by to have the appraisal. And the appraiser will come to the property. Generally, an appraisal inspection is going to take a few hours, sometimes between 3 and 4 hours, depending on the size of the house. And I want to draw your attention to the screen because these are the main things that the appraiser will be looking at during the process of the inspection. One is the property, the size, the condition, and the upgrades. How big is this home? They're going to be looking at square footage. They're going to be looking at how many bathrooms is in the home. They're going to be looking at how many bedrooms are in the home. They're going to want to look at the condition of the home, the piping, the electrical, the mechanical, your HV systems, your roofing, right? They also want to look at upgrades. They're going to want to know what part of these homes are upgraded because it greatly affects the value. You always hear the old adage of make sure you have your kitchen and your bathrooms updated if you're selling the home. It's very important because it does impact your appraisal value. And those are key things that your appraiser is going to look at. Second is location and neighborhood. The appraiser is definitely going to want to look at where the property is located in terms of the location in the neighborhood. Are you near a school? Are you near a hospital? Are you near critical resources? Are you in an area that floods, right? Those are key factors that will really impact your your appraisal. Is the neighborhood and we'll talk about this with subjective language. What type of neighborhood is being characterized by the appraiser? You want to look out for that. But they want to make their opinions about the neighborhood. Is it a new neighborhood? Is it a developing neighborhood? Is it a mixed-use neighborhood? These are all things that are being evaluated on the appraisal. The next, which is very important also, is the comps, the comparables. So when you're looking at the comparables, the appraiser is looking at what homes in a similarly that are similarly situated within a target range and has been recently sold. So three factors, right? Houses recently sold, those that are similarly situated, and within a specific time frame. Generally, an appraisal, the appraisal, when they look at comps, they're looking at comps that are between 3 to 6 months. That means they're looking at homes similarly situated that have sold within the past 3 to 6 months. Anything past that time period generally is considered old. And that's very important because when we're looking at comparables, you want to make sure that the appraisal is looking at properties that have been recently sold. And if they haven't been recently sold, you want to know why, right? Because if there are comparables that have been recently sold that should be compared, but the appraiser does not use them, that can be some indication of bias. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Second is similar size, location, condition. We kind of went over that piece in the property. Similar size house, square footage, the number of levels, whether there's a basement, whether there's an attic, location, whether it's near a highway, whether it's near shopping centers, all those things are matter in your comps. And lastly, when they're done the evaluation, the inspector is going to analyze that data. They're going to assign an appraisal value. So based on the property's condition and based on the comparables, they're going to say, this is what your property is worth. This is what we're valuing your property to be worth. And then lastly, they're going to produce a report that they're going to provide to the lender because the lender is going to use that report to execute underwriting and to also make the final stages of giving the individual a mortgage commitment. Because again, as we talked about, your purchase is contingent upon an appraisal. They give a satisfactory appraisal in order to get the mortgage commitment. So a process in itself, but a very important process that you all should be aware of when you're purchasing homes, or even if you're selling homes, to understand what's happening on the back end with the buyer. Okay. Challenging an appraisal. So this is important because we talked about the process and we talked about those instances where the appraisal may be less than your purchase price. And let's talk about the reasons for in which that appraisal could come in for less than you initially expected. One, the seller and the agent may have overestimated the value of the house. So when you're selling a home, you're going to call your real estate agent, they're going to come over, they're going to run the comps. That's the good part about this process, because if you have a good agent, their job is to really do an initial run of the comps so they can give you a good idea of what your home may be going for. In certain markets and with certain real estate agents, they are looking to make the best effort in getting your home's value as close as possible to the market value. But sometimes that's overestimated, right? Your house may be worth 500 and the realtor may say, all right, well, let's just do 525. Let's just throw it out there. Let's see what we get. You may get 525 and that's great. However, when that appraisal comes back, the value as compared may not reach the 525 level. So sometimes if appraisals are less than you expect, less than that purchase price, it could be because the agent overestimated the value, or the seller was just very, very insistent that they want a certain price for their house. And when that appraisal came back, the value may have been lower than what they wanted. So we often see instances like that. Second, the appraiser could have made a mistake. It happens. So read your appraisal. I've seen appraisals where there was the wrong address. I've seen appraisals where the square footage was wrong. I've seen appraisals where it was a less number of bedrooms than actually existed. So it's important to make sure that when you're reading appraisals that you fact checked how they're characterizing your home. That's very important to your comps and it's very important to the ending value that is assigned to your property. And last but not least is the appraisal that may be biased, right? And that's what we're mainly here to talk about when that appraisal is biased. So while there's room for overestimation and while there's room for an appraiser to make mistakes, there's also very much room for the appraisal to be biased. And we'll talk more about what that means. So lastly on that piece, and this is really relevant to number two and number three when an appraisal has made a mistake or when the appraisal is biased, the buyer has rights. The buyer does not have to sit back and have their property undervalued. They have rights. And one of the processes, probably one of the most formalized process, is called the reconsideration of value. So you'll see in parentheses ROV, and people may refer to it as ROV. It's the reconsideration of value process. And we'll walk through what that process means. The process is a formal pathway for buyers to request a reassessment of the appraisal value from their lender. And by federal law, the lender is required to provide such a pathway. This pathway looks like it's initiated by the lender. Your buyer can't initiate the process. You as the buyer, the seller cannot initiate the process. An agent nor an attorney can initiate the process. It has to be initiated by the lender because as we discussed before, it's for the lender. So they have to be a key partner in requesting the reassessment. Second, the ROV, it's not a redo of the inspection. The appraiser will not come back out to re-inspect the home. It is a review. So the appraiser is looking at the actual report. They're looking at what they have put on the report, all the data that is in the report. They're also looking at what evidence you have produced, whether that's updated comps, whether that's pictures, whether that's documentation of some factual mistakes that we talked about earlier, correcting those mistakes. They will review the information and make a determination on whether they'll change the value based on the presented information. And second, it must be supported by data. And I mentioned a couple examples of the data. It can be based on your opinion. So I know we love our homes. We've lived there. We've put our blood, sweat, and tears. We've painted a few bathrooms and put our nice decorative furniture in there. And we think our houses are the bomb. And they probably are. But that's our opinion, right? It's a subjective opinion. So while we think our homes may be worth a specific amount, it has to be supported by data. So when we're looking at the reconsideration of value, it's important that when you're partaking in that process, that you're taking pictures to show an objection to what the appraiser is saying. It's important to present actual data. You're working with your realtor to present higher comps to show that it is worthy of that review. And unfortunately, an appraiser doesn't have to change his mind. Like that's the part that kind of rubs me the wrong way, but they're not required to change their mind. And if that's the case, there are other courses of action that a buyer can undertake to challenge that assessment. So if an RV doesn't work, and we just mentioned if that appraiser will not change his mind and we're not satisfied with that appraisal value, there's a couple things that you can do. One is that you can request a second appraisal if permitted. Again, this is a lender-initiated process. So the lender does not allow a second appraisal. You can't have the second appraisal because the appraisal does follow the property. And if they do not allow it to be considered as a part of your mortgage application, they don't allow it. But if you get the opportunity to ask for a second appraisal, you want to do it. And you want to make sure that you have appropriate backing so when you make that request of the lender, that they can't say no. The second appraisal is going to be in comparison to that first one. And hopefully it shows that lender of the mistakes that were made, possibly the bias that was a part of that appraisal, and that the lender will make the appropriate decision about that mortgage commitment going forward. The second is a renegotiation of the price. As we mentioned before, when we're talking contracts, renegotiations, you always build the flexibility in as the attorney. So the ROV does not work. If you can't get the appraiser to change his mind, you can go back to the seller, especially if there are clauses already built in to help you with that process. So a lot of times, if my client's appraisal value comes in lower than the purchase price, I'm going back to that seller. I'm going to say, hey, seller, well, we entered into this contract. We understood the price to be this. However, at this point, the appraisal value shows that it's much lower. Now, listen, I'm going to have a problem with this mortgage commitment. You know, the lender is not going to give my client a mortgage based on this number. So if you want this deal to go through, let's renegotiate this price. Most times, if a seller is really motivated, if they're ready to sell, they're going to negotiate. And if they're not, they won't. But it's one tool in our arsenal that we can use to really get the buyer to the closing table um, on the front end without having to derail the closing. Second is exercising contingencies. One thing that I mentioned before, if the renegotiation of that price doesn't work, we're exercising contingencies. Now, in your standard realtor's contract, there's no contingency about an appraisal directly. There's nothing explicit in a standard realtor's contract that addresses an appraisal. I'm going to do a shameless plug because I'm an attorney, which is why it's important that you get attorneys to handle your real estate transactions, because knowing that one doesn't exist is very important that your attorney is inserting those particular clauses in your contract during your attorney review period. And a lot of times, as I mentioned before, we're throwing that clause in. We're throwing the clause in that if the purchase price is higher than the appraisal price, we're going to, in good faith, renegotiate the purchase price, or either party will have the ability to cancel. And that's part of exercising the contingency. But if that doesn't work in any contract, you have to get a mortgage commitment. And again, if the lender is not satisfied that the appraised value meets that purchase price, they're not going to give a mortgage. So in that case, we can say, well, seller, this transaction was contingent upon a successful appraisal. Right now, since you do not want to renegotiate the purchase price, my lender is not offering me a mortgage, and therefore I have to exercise the contingency that I can no longer move forward in this contract. And it's legal. It's totally legal. If you cannot get a mortgage commitment, you can exit a deal. So that's the bigger picture of exercising the contingencies. Last but not least, and you'll hear my colleague Aarin Williams talk about this, if none of those works, none of them work, or you want to explore multiple options, right? Maybe you get to the closing table and still aren't satisfied with that appraisal. And if you think that a part of that appraisal process that there is bias involved, you can consider whether this should be escalated to the Division of Civil Rights or the State Board of Appraisals. You can even consider whether you want to litigate. You talk to a litigation attorney, maybe you want to sue or take that appraisal company to court. Those are all a part of your options when you're considering the RV is just not working for you. Okay. So I want to go over some quick examples of what you should be looking for during your appraisal process, just to make sure that we're all clear on what bias could potentially look like when you're examining your appraisal. And I think examples are probably the best way so you guys can understand exactly what we will be referring throughout this presentation. So let's jump right in. Example 1. Jessica enters into a contract for $400,000. The appraisal comes in at $350,000. That's a $50,000 difference. That's a big difference when you're purchasing a home. There is strong market activity that supports the contract price. That means there is a market. There are comparables that clearly shows that there are other properties similarly situated there's appraisal that's taken place. There's a house that's been sold within 3 to 6 months that supports a $400,000 purchase price. However, after examining the appraisal report, it appears that the comparable sales used are from older or weaker areas. Now, the first thing first, let's issue spot. Is there something inconsistent with the home value? Well, obviously, right, there's a $50,000 difference. But what issues do we see? The first issue we see is that the comps that we use were older. Again, it's important that you remember comparables should be between 3 and 6 months old. If they are over 3 to 6 months, it should be a daggone good reason why they're beyond 3 to 6 months. And sometimes it could be due to the market, right? There has been no homes in that area that has been sold lately. We've seen that many years ago during the recession when the market's weak. No one's buying houses, so you can't get good comparables, right? Or the interest rates are really high and no one's really buying because we're on the edge of a recession and no one's buying homes in this particular economic environment. That could be another reason for why the comparables are old, but there needs to be a justification because if it's not, those comparables should be between 3 and 6 months. So in this particular example, I have a little bit of problem with this appraisal report because obviously, like I mentioned, there's strong market activity that supports the contract price, but the appraiser used older comparables, meaning beyond that time period, and in weaker areas. And when we say weaker areas, we're talking about neighboring towns, neighboring uh, side neighborhoods that the market value for homes are lower or higher, but in this case, lower. And I'm going to give you a quick example. I'm not sure of most of us are from Mercer County, so I want to give a quick example. The Ewing and Trenton line. As you guys know, Ewing and Trenton, geographically, they lay side by side. If you're purchasing a home in Ewing, and we have some parts of Ewing that go right on that Ewing-Trenton line. If you're purchasing a home in Ewing, instead of looking in Ewing for the comparables, the appraiser decided to look in certain parts of Trenton for the comparables. And as we know, nothing is wrong with the comparables in Trenton per se. However, the market in Trenton is lower than the market in Ewing. That is a fact. That is factual. That is not a subjective opinion. So we want to make sure that when appraisers are marking the comparables, that they're not older and they're not in areas that's going to downturn the value of that appraisal. Okay. All right. Second example. Neighboring adjustments issues. So Michael is purchasing a property in a predominantly minority neighborhood. His appraisal reports reflects downward adjustments tied to the location. After reviewing the report, I noticed that nearby similar homes are valued higher in different neighborhoods. The appraisal includes a statement that says the property is located in a transitioning neighborhood. Now, ladies, I don't know if you're wondering like I'm wondering, but transitioning, what does that mean to you? Well, I think it can mean a myriad of issues. It can mean something totally different from me than it means to you. And in that respect, we consider that subjective language. Um, it's really interesting when appraisers use language like transitioning neighborhood. I'm curious, what does that mean? How is it measured? What is it based off? As we mentioned before, your appraisal is based off data. It's not based off your opinion. It's based off data that's tied to specific metrics that we all can measure. I'm not sure if transitioning neighborhood is a word that can be measured, is a word that can be backed up by data. Now, please correct me if I'm wrong, but transitioning is very subjective language. And I think this is particularly a language that we should be very cautious about in appraisals because it could be indicative of bias. And an example of other subjective language, poor neighborhood, good neighborhood. Well, what does that mean to you as compared to another person? Undesirable versus a desirable neighborhood. We've even seen examples of appraisers saying there's no pride in ownership in this neighborhood, or there is pride in ownership in this neighborhood. Well, who is he to say, right? So we want to make sure that when we look at our appraisals and we're looking at the language that's being used, that it is language that can be measured, backed by data, and that is based on metrics that can properly evaluate the condition of the home and the comparables to result in a favorable appraisal report. Okay. Last example. Pam is purchasing an updated, well-maintained home for $500,000. The appraisal value is $425,000. Again, that's $75,000 lower than the purchase price. That's a big deal. The appraiser uses comps that are farther away, smaller, and less updated. There is a home similarly situated within 1 mile of the property that was sold for $505,000. Issues are better comps existed, but were simply ignored. Why wasn't the home that was 1 mile away that sold for $5,000 more than the purchase price? Why wasn't that considered, right? Similarly situated, as the facts have shown, the limited facts that we have from this case study, we would think that that property should have been considered. If that's the case, this property may have some equity, and those are the type of situations that we want. But that was ignored. So whenever you see or you're in your agent, you can work with your agent to understand wherever there's comps that should have been used that weren't, it could be indicative of bias. Second is that the adjustments don't reflect true differences. And when we're talking about adjustments, we're talking about dollar values that become variables in determining the value of a home. And in this case, we see that the comps used were farther away. Well, how much farther away, right? Are we talking the difference of 20 miles? And we know we have a property located within 1 mile that was reconsidered. We also know that the property that the appraiser used was smaller. And as we mentioned before, when you're looking at appraisal, the appraiser should be looking at comparable housing, meaning that the square footage should be as similar as possible, right? The levels in the house typically don't matter, but the square footage, the acres of land that's consistent with the house should be as close as possible to the comparables being used. And lastly, it was less updated. An appraisal, as we mentioned, definitely looks at upgrades. If you have an upgraded kitchen, if you have an upgraded bathroom, if your roof, if your HVAC systems were upgraded, if your electrical has been updated, if you no longer have that knob and tube, and you've entered the 21st century with the appropriate electric panels that pass state code, like those things are considered of value in an appraisal. And when they're ignored, it is definitely indicative of bias, right? And we have to be able to look at those things and make the determination whether the things that we see, whether they're subjective language, whether their comparables are off, whether there are mistakes, are they simply reflections of the market, or are they simply indicative of bias? And we'll look at this quickly because when we make this analysis, it's very important that one, we don't always jump to conclusions, right? Not all times is it bias. But we want to be very aware of those circumstances where it could be. So a couple of things in terms of market conditions, neighborhood changes. Obviously, the market is definitely impacted by changes in the neighborhood. If there's new housing being built, if there's mixed use housing being built, if you live in Ewing, Ewing is doing a great job in the influx of housing. There are housing complexes popping up everywhere that will greatly increase the value of the homes in that area. So market conditions can greatly determine what an appraisal ultimately looks like. Low housing stock, as mentioned before, if people are not buying homes or if people aren't selling homes, you're going to get older values, and the comparables may look beyond that 6 month period. They could look like a house. They could be compared to a house that was sold 8 months a year ago. Not because the inspector was biased, but because simply no one in the surrounding mileage sold a home during that time. And low buyer market, again, high interest rates, recession, all these things contribute to these older appraisal values. However, when we look at potential discrimination, we want to take notice at when comps that seem inconsistent, right? Using comparables that are located that are tied downward to locations that may be transitioning, or comps that are not considering the upgrades, comps that are not considering the size of the house. Those are very important things. The value is far below the contract price. Typically, I've seen appraisal values between 20, 30 at the most in terms of the difference. When you see 40, 50, 60, 70, $100,000 differences between the appraisal value and the purchase price, you got to take a look at that. You have to take a second look at that. That is very extreme, and you typically do not see circumstances like that. So that perks my ears up. It makes me take an extra look and be able to advise my client on what the next steps are. Major gap in prior evaluations. So if you have a prior evaluation and we mentioned requesting a second appraisal, if there's a huge difference between the two, that could be indicative of bias with the first appraisal. I want to make sure that we understand that. Again, like we mentioned, ignoring upgrades and the subjective language. All these things through case law, through complaints, and I'm sure Aarin will talk more about this, filed, we're able to see really the trends and the patterns in discrimination. Because as you guys know, discrimination isn't always overt, right? It isn't always blatant. It isn't always in your face. A lot of times it's very much subtle, very much under the radar. And in those circumstances, we have to be keen. We have to have a keen eye. We have to make sure that we know the signs, some of the flags, and we've talked about a lot of them today, so we can discern whether this is a situation of the market conditions are changing the appraisal, or whether this is something we should escalate because there's discrimination involved. In a nutshell, not every low appraisal is discrimination, but when patterns emerge and the data doesn't align, because as we know, data is really important when it comes to appraisals, it raises questions, as it should. And those concerns should be taken very seriously. But at the end of the day, appraisal is more than just a number. It is more than a numbers game. It is an investment. It can determine home ownership, access to home ownership. It can close people out of home ownership. It can close people out of, excuse me, refinancing when they're able to pull money and invest in other areas. Excuse me. And ultimately interferes with wealth building opportunities. So that is my presentation. I don't know what happened to my voice just now, but nevertheless, I'm really excited to share this information with you. My voice will not stop me from the Q&A period. So I'm going to pass this on to Aarin, and we'll figure out what's going to make this go away so we can engage in some good dialogue. Thank you all for listening.
Taraun, thank you so much for an amazing presentation. I learned so much, and we're so thankful for you to be able to bring this information to us and really to provide your expertise and to tee up what I know Aarin will also be talking about as well. So thank you so much for that. It was amazing. And I do hope that the pollen's been getting people, so that might be what it is.
Yes, honestly, are no joke. It will not deter me from this conversation, so thank you.
Awesome. All right, I'm turning things over to my soror, Yasmine Gonzalez. She will introduce our next speaker.
Yes. Good evening, sorors, partners, and community members. I have the distinct honor of introducing my soror, our soror, Aarin Michele Williams, Esquire. She is a civil rights attorney, a reproductive justice advocate, and senior strategist with a record of leading high-impact civil rights initiatives across law, policy, and public systems. She currently serves as chief advisor to the director of the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights, where she helped drive major enforcement actions, including historic redlining matters, the nation's first law prohibiting housing discrimination based on criminal record, statewide efforts to combat appraisal bias, and served on statewide task forces related to reproductive rights, healthcare inequities, and so much more. For the sake of time, we shortened her bio, but she has done tremendous work, and we are honored to have you here to present with us this evening. So can everyone please welcome Ms. Aarin Williams, Esquire.
Thank you so much, sorors, and everyone in the community who has joined. I'm just confirming you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, beautiful. I'm going to jump in. Thank you to everyone who is present. Thank you to my friend and colleague, Taraun, for giving such a really robust foundation for the conversation. I apologize in advance if I'm speaking too quickly, and I apologize if anything is repetitive, but I'm going to try to breeze through and highlight some things that possibly have already been said. But as people say, with our attention spans nowadays, you have to hear things 6 times or 7 times before you really, before it lands. So as mentioned, I'm with the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights, or what's referred to as DCR. Very briefly, DCR is the state's only civil rights agency that both prosecutes, investigates, and regulates our anti-discrimination and civil rights laws. I will just maybe have a moment to explain that a little bit later in the program. So for sake of time, I'm going to skip past the program goals, and I'm going to jump right into the history of appraisal bias. So just to lay some foundational information on the root of this systemic issue and its impact, as it was already described in appraisals, an estimate of the value of property.
Aarin, I'm sorry to cut you off. Are you sharing your screen?
Oh, I thought I was. Am I not?
I don't see it.
Apologies. You're just seeing me talking.
Just fine. I just want to make sure you have your slides
There we
up.
go. How about now? Can you see it now?
Yes, I can.
All right.
Yes.
You didn't miss anything. All y'all saw was the DCR logo. So we're jumping right in to
the history of appraisal bias. So, like I said, an appraisal, as you heard from Taraun, is an estimate of the value of property, such as a home. An appraisal is often used to establish the value of a home. And the appraisal process does not always get applied equally or equitably for all people. And as we know, this leads to long-term underevaluation of entire homes, people, and entire communities. And these concepts and their dangerous roots are not new, unfortunately, to our community and other historically marginalized communities. So on the screen, I share a few quotes from decades worth of appraiser manuals, highlighting the ways that race, color, religion, national origin of many people has been used to undervalue neighborhoods, homes, and ultimately redline communities. Now, what I often like to do is to notice everyone to notice the years. 1946 is on the screen, 1973, and when I'm in person, I often ask people to raise their hand if they were born around that time, or if they know somebody who was, just to ground us in acknowledging that these issues are something that are pervasive and continue, and that this was not that long ago. So I'll just show that in 1946, the manual required the following, though, and this is the appraisal manual. And it states that those nationalities and races having the most favorable influence, and this was specifically referring to area in Chicago, come first in the list, and those exerting detrimental effects come last. And then they go on to rank based upon that category and listing English, German, Scottish, Irish, and Scandinavians as the best. And towards the end, we will see that they mention that South Italians, Negroes, and Mexicans are listed as those who would be detrimental to home evaluations. But in 1973, we have again the American Institute of Real Estate Appraisers course manual, and it read, as a general rule, homogeneity, pardon my mispronunciation, my southern tongue always holds me back, of the population contributes to the stability of real estate values. Information on the percentage of native-born whites, foreign whites, and non-white population is important, and the changes in this composition have a significance. As a general rule, minority groups are found at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder, and problems associated with minority group segments of the population can hinder community growth. And so, what's again important about this is that these were rules and policies that appraisers were educated to abide by in their work at those periods of time. I'm going to play a video just so we can understand the issue, because for most Americans, their home is their single most important financial asset and holds the key to wealth, stability, opportunity for their family, and due directly to generations of widespread systemic and systematic laws, policies, and practices across sectors, quite honestly, not even just in home appraisals. Today, Black and Latinx families have considerably less wealth than white families. So the 2019 survey of consumer finances finds that white families on average hold $983,400 in wealth. And that was in 2019, compared to $142,500 for Black communities and families, and $165,500 for Latino families on average. So this video illustrates what appraisal discrimination is and how it impacts people directly. I think it's helpful to just see.
Financially, in choosing Prince George's County, we are gaining exponentially in terms of that true community experience that is hard and rare to find.
But Rashenda Ingram Harvey and her husband Derek don't see it that way.
Just don't buy in Prince George's County. I mean, at the end of the day, this is historical. This is not something that just started. This is something that's been going on.
Gearing up for a move to Texas, the two put their 5-bedroom Upper Marlboro home on the market earlier this year. They listed it for $1.25 million and received an offer above the list price. The house appraised at $1.19 million, lower than the nearly $1.3 million sales price. The realtor tried stepping in.
How often do African American people buy $1 million homes? And in an area like that where, you know, they look at Prince George's County as an area that's made for Black people.
These stories reflect a known problem. 2018 report from the Brookings Institute showed that owner-occupied homes in Black neighborhoods are undervalued by about $48,000 on average. That average remained consistent when we examined their data for the Washington Metro. And when you consider the losses nationwide, Brookings Institute says it amounts to about $156 billion in cumulative losses. Researchers point to bias in the home buying process for contributing to the disparity, pointing out appraisals as an important role. An analysis by real estate brokerage Redfin said appraisals can be problematic because they can perpetuate the cycle of racism by assigning lower values to homes in Black neighborhoods than white neighborhoods. But while homeowners complain of appraisal bias, few are filing complaints. The Maryland Commission of Real Estate Appraisers, Appraisal Management Companies, and Home Inspectors tells us on average they receive about 5 complaints a month. And when we ask specifically about complaints filed in Prince George's County about the devaluation of their homes, officials tell us they weren't aware of an influx of complaints. Priestley and Harvey said they did not file formal complaints because they had no idea the commission existed. But Priestley hopes educating others will save time and money. She and a group of community leaders formed the group Fair and Unbiased Appraisal Advocates. They even launched the website blackhomesmatter.org.
Until we bring this conversation to the forefront, to one that homeowners know to be their own advocates and to be aware of this, and to the conscience of appraisers and banks, we've got a lot of work to do.
Okay, so I chose that video for various reasons. The one that I wanted to highlight is because there was action behind it, and I know that we are all about taking action. And so you see that that one woman in particular and her family and her community came together to form an organization. And at the end of this presentation, I hope to get to some suggestions on how community members and as well as our sorority and others can take action around this issue. Okay, I'm still going to try to, I'm trying to adopt and pivot, but I want to mention that in the wake of the 2020 Black Lives Matter movement, there was a push to eradicate racism and its ongoing impacts in Black and Brown communities. Some governmental and private organizations called for specific reforms. One amongst many of those was this push for appraisal reforms and a comprehensive examination of the structure and governance of the appraisal industry. And in response to calls for reforms and many federal agencies analyzed the data that they had and could collect. And states like, and all of this was under the Biden administration. And so states like our own were charged with a similar obligation to eradicate appraisal discrimination. And in 2022, then New Jersey Attorney General Matthew Platkin had also prioritized achieving fair housing around our state, with DCR leading the charge and collaborating with other agencies to address and investigate appraisal discrimination. However, as we know, under the current federal administration, these issues are not a priority. And the Biden administration's task force on appraisal discrimination that existed for a few years has now been completely scrubbed from the website and has been dismantled. However, here in our state, we continue to do the work.
For as much as we're
So, Taraun talked about this a little bit, but I want to highlight some things. What we're describing and what Taraun described about the difference between an appraised value and the contract price is often called an appraisal gap. And that occurs when a property is appraised lower than the contract price. And an appraisal gap is frankly and unfortunately more likely to occur in Black or Latinx communities and census tracts, more so than white census tracts. And nationally, the majority of appraisers who were reviewed showed an appraisal gap, which means that those appraisers were showing that they were undervaluing homes. And that is, the issue was not limited just a few bad apples, but the majority of appraisers who were doing this. So that is important to note, because frankly, the majority of appraisers are also white and male. And so we can also assume that is occurring in our own state as well. In New Jersey, in fact, homes are an estimated 11.6% more likely to appraise below the contract price if they are in neighborhoods with a Black population more than 50%. Right. And some metro areas may experience even a higher rate of undervaluation than others based on expected appreciation, property condition, number of homes available for sale, the demand for potential buyers, and other observable characteristics. So the purpose of tying appraised value to the contract price is that real demand exists at the specified contract price. So what you're seeing again is what I've already mentioned on the screen, but there is a graphic that no longer can be found on the federal websites because again, it has been removed, that shows the compounding effect of undervaluations. You start with the market value of a home, and then if it's undervalued, that home is worth less literally. But importantly, as you see, there are multiple homes in that picture because you're not only undervaluing your individual home, that is an undervaluation of that entire community. And when we know that's impacting our community more frequently, at least almost 50%, that is a problem. So, um, as mentioned, home ownership is a significant wealth builder for most people in America. For Black Americans, over 90% of wealth comes from home ownership through our home equity. This explains in part why it is critically important to have accurate, unbiased home valuations because it is directly impacting the entire community's wealth and access and education and opportunities for generations and resources. And a home appraisal is significant for buyers and sellers alike. For a buyer, an appraisal below the contract price may mean that the buyer must increase their down payment, and that increase in the buyer's out-of-pocket payment may cause the sale to fall through, potentially preventing a prospective buyer from purchasing a home. Or for a seller, an appraisal below the contract price may force the seller to renegotiate the sale at a lower price. And of course, when a home is sold at a lower price, that sale becomes a candidate for other comparables um, as Taraun described. So briefly on our screen, DCR has created a entire social media kit. This is one of the graphics that we created that are sometimes specific to New Jersey statistics. I know the sorors on here have those materials. I can share them with you. And as I mentioned, the average 90% of New Jersey appraisers are white and men. So that means not only do we have a race issue, we also have a gender issue. The average white family can use their home to leverage 370,000 plus more in capital than than Black families. Pandemic era housing booms widened the racial appraisal gaps. Home prices rose approximately 45%, but gains were far higher in white neighborhoods at a rate of $136,000 than in communities of color, where we were only seeing equity build possibly at most around $60,000. And even in the hottest markets, which New Jersey was, inequity intensified during that time when we were selling homes. Homes owned by white homeowners were valued up to 43% higher than comparable homes owned by people of color. So Taraun gave some wonderful examples. I'm going to give a few examples of signs of appraisal discrimination. So again, ultimately, the appraisal process is very discretionary, and our state regulators are working to remedy this level of discrimination and discretion that allows for bias. But here are some examples. So some things you might want to look at. Higher valuation. So an example is what we observed in the clip where more than one valuation is conducted, which hopefully can occur. And then there's a subsequent appraisal that comes in higher. The higher valuation doesn't automatically mean the first or the other appraisals are discriminatory. However, it may be enough for a claim of discrimination to go forward. And there is an unfortunate practice of whitewashing one's home. This occurs when a homeowner of color or different religions, or I've even received complaints about same-sex couples, removes pictures of themselves, their family, their art, and other important items that could be identified with their race, ethnicity, or other marginalization. And this also extends to having a white person stand in for them during the appraisal process. This is a demoralizing practice, but one that some people feel the need to do to protect themselves from biased appraisers. Something else you should look at are tax assessments. Typically, your property taxes are lower than the value of your home. So if your home appraisal is lower than the tax assessment, that may be a flag of discrimination or some error in the appraiser's practice, which I've absolutely seen. Comparables, Taraun has already described, are often the first indicator. There may be bias where the appraiser is using comps in their report or your report that are too dissimilar in square footage, age, location, and other factors. And your value doesn't align with other online platforms like Redfin or Zillow. Like you were expecting to use that price, and you look and it's like significantly different. And of course, there could be overt statements referring to race, class, source of lawful income, or other protected classes. So we've mentioned working class Black neighborhood we've seen. The landlord accepts Section 8 vouchers, which is a red flag because you're not supposed to refer to that. They may say something like white flight or white only or working class Black neighborhood. They may use certain references to the types of language that is spoken in the neighborhood, Black race population above the state average, homogeneous neighborhood with good schools. This is not an automatic symbol, but there are some ways for you to see that these could be potential discrimination or flags. Okay. So, like mentioned at the beginning, to combat what we know is an issue in our state. In January of 2024, DCR, in collaboration with the New Jersey Department of Consumer Affairs, launched an initiative to combat residential appraisal discrimination with a particular focus on race-based discrimination occurring in the industry. And we had a coordinated effort, which includes all these actions here. I will not read through all of them, but what I do want to highlight is our legal guidance. I'm not going to get too legally, but I do think it's important for us to understand parts of the law. But I do also want to mention the public education. So we do webinars like this. There's a whole landing page with fact sheets on it, videos, and guidance documents that I encourage you to review. So the legal side, but I'm gonna do it quick. Because I do want to spend some time explaining a really important New Jersey law against discrimination, which is the NJLAD, the most comprehensive civil rights law probably in the nation. But even with that comprehensive law, there's still a lot of discrimination in our state. So with that in mind, the LAD's broad language prohibits discrimination, not just by the appraisers, but also by the entities involved in selecting an appraiser and using the appraisal report to decide whether and on what terms to extend a mortgage or other financing. So those entities can include lenders, such as banks and non-bank mortgage lenders, appraisal management companies, who sometimes are the intermediary between the appraiser and the mortgage lender, which connects lenders with appraisers and may even manage the appraisal process during a real estate transaction. So often we're talking about just the appraisers, but there is a whole reporting process, and all of them can, if they rely upon a potentially discriminatory appraisal, they also can be held liable. So this is not a limited list. It may also include potentially realtors or brokers, because we've heard some complaints about them as well. So I don't want this to be a legal lecture, but I do think it's important to explain the two approaches to discrimination, and I'll explain to you why. So there is a way that there is a disparate treatment, and that can occur when an entity or a person, like appraiser at AMC, treats an individual or a community differently because of their characteristics. So, for example, an appraiser has a policy or practice that he will shave off $1,000 for every square foot in homes located in the city of Trenton, because he doesn't believe prospective buyers value homes in Black neighborhoods or in Trenton, which is Black neighborhoods. In Trenton, that can be discrimination. And that appraiser and anyone who relies upon the appraisal report can be held liable. Another example, in those cases, actually, I'll skip that example. Let me see. I'll stop there, actually, because I can keep on going. But those are some examples. The point of this really is to ensure that we understand is that it's not just the appraisers who can be held liable, but appraisal management companies and mortgage lenders also. Briefly, there is, as Taraun mentioned, a New Jersey Real Estate Appraiser Board. They have federal and state requirements to take 7 hours of bias and discrimination courses as of a few years ago. That was actually passed effective March 2025. They also have certain appraisal qualifications. You can certainly report any concerns to the appraiser board, and they will investigate. If it's a claim of discrimination, however, that is often kicked over to DCR for us to personally investigate, since we are the experts in discrimination and they are the experts in just appraisal practices. Last but certainly not least, I'm again happy to say that New Jersey is currently the only state that we are aware of, and we are in contact regularly with our counterparts across other states, that we are the only state that has developed such a comprehensive plan like this, where we are involving impacted communities, appraisal boards, enforcement, policy initiatives, trainings, and legal guidance. We want you to get the word out and drive up the momentum. And I've been speaking for a few years to various groups about how to best do that. We've been requesting that you disperse our materials with your network, post information on your website, spread the word, host events like this, lunch and learns, maybe complaint drives, community presentations, conferences, webinars, interviews, and spotlights even. And the goal is that people know where to report also. Now, I do always like to say, as you see on the screen, the first line of defense really is your access and your right to an ROV, which Taraun already described. That is the quickest way to receive immediate response. Then you can report to DCR because transparently, which I'm probably am to a fault, transparently reporting to DCR will require an investigation. And that investigation can take months or frequently years. So that data, that information is great and wonderful, but I don't want you to believe that that's going to be as quick as working with your attorney, working with your realtor, or whoever to automatically respond to a potential discriminatory appraisal. And then, of course, you can also report to the Board of Appraisers through DCA. Very briefly, I like to highlight why it can be important to report to DCR. We have remedies and we have access to all types of remedies. That's monetary damages, specific performance, like requiring people to change their policies internally, restitution, requiring them to take types of training, requiring them to give money or create scholarship funds. We've done all those kinds of things before, not necessarily specific to appraisals, but across our jurisdiction. So if you can scan, if possible, you can scan the QR code that should take you to the DCR landing page, specifically about home appraisals, where you can learn more information about the work we are doing. And I am done.
So, Angelica, we do have a question in the chat.
Okay, I wanted to first say, Aarin Williams, thank you so much for that robust piece of information that you provided. Honestly, learning so much. As a renter, there's a lot of stuff you just don't know. And thinking about buying, this information shared tonight was just so helpful. I wish I would have sat in one of the real estate classes in law school, but I didn't, and now I wish I did. But you both have
Well, they didn't teach it. I don't think they taught this. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty confident. I took some.
They did not.
Yeah,
Okay. All right. So I didn't miss anything.
No, you
But
didn't.
you both were so awesome with this information. It's been so timely with everything that has just been impacting our communities and the targeted efforts to undermine our access. So this is both timely and informative. And I just want to say thank you, Aarin. Thank you to Taraun for giving us this very robust piece of information because it was beyond helpful and informative. We do have a question in chat, so I'm going to go ahead and field it. And if we get any more questions, I will be sure to bring them up. So the question I see here is, are there certain appraisal companies that have been known for more discriminative practices compared to others?
I'm going to defer to Aarin on that one.
I knew you would, but you shouldn't because
I don't know if Aarin will be able to answer that, bro.
That is true. I unfortunately have an answer. Unfortunately, I'm not permitted to disclose an answer because as we do investigations, we are not permitted to disclose them until they have either settled or made public.
Can they Oprah request an answer?
I choose not to respond to that either.
Okay, so I'm going to jump
But
out.
you can. Yes.
Can I jump into? I had a quick question, just a follow up of that. I know she probably can't answer that question. But Aarin, is there a specific appraisal company or minority owned appraisal company that you may know of that we can help promote so that people who are going to purchase in the future can possibly look into using that?
I do not. I don't have a specific name, but I'll say this, but I will probably defer to Taraun. We have been in communication, not recently, but initially with the BREPA, which is the Black Real Estate professionals, which includes real estate professionals, which includes appraisers. And I know that there are Black appraisers and Black management companies and AMCs in our state or who operate in our state. Although I do know my understanding is that it's pretty limited. So I would work with BREPA, BREPA, but I defer to Taraun beyond that.
Unfortunately, and this is a shame to say, I've never come across a Black appraiser. I just haven't. And I think that's reflective of the condition of the industry.
It is.
I think, and I want to follow up on Aarin's because she can't speak, and it is a part of the nature of her job. But I would say if you're really interested in that, you can put in a Oprah request. That's OPRA. It's an Oprah request. It's an open public record act that guarantees members of the public to public information. And if you want to make a request to get a list, as long as that list doesn't have to be, and the rules are changing, so generated per se, but you can request information in regards to uh, appraisers that have been maybe charged or investigated. Make sure your language is very specific. If not, they may kick it back if it's too broad.
Yep.
But
Yep.
you can definitely request that information if you're interested.
Yep. If I could also add to your point, Taraun, about the reflection on the industry, I should have looked before, but there definitely, as I passed through, there have been a lot of laws and updates and policies and regulations that have changed in our state around this. Not only have there been requirements for appraisers to take trainings, there has been, I believe, I strongly believe that there has been some relaxation of some of the requirements to become an appraiser. And a lot of that is to ensure that there could continue to be a more diversity in appraising. Like for example, my husband, who does 600 different things, including being a teacher, tried to also become an appraiser. He found a wall when he had to do 1,000 hours, which he was willing to do. He knew that, but you need to have someone who's willing to be your apprentice, or he needs to do an apprenticeship, and that required someone from the old boys club to agree to do that, and that was harder than it should have been. So I recommend as one of the actions that folks try to become appraisers, support. And when we're talking to legislators or anyone, tax assessors, anyone within that policy realm, that we have some actions and requests related to that. We're asking them what's the status of that bill? How are we supporting it? What's the data around it? Has there been an increase? Maybe some women on this call right now want to become appraisers because it can be relatively lucrative. So just so we can change the tide, because we know, unfortunately, there's a lot of conversations like, well, we changed the law, but there hasn't been there, nobody's been applying, or like that stuff really happens. And a lot of times it's because folks don't know that this is even an option. So maybe there's an initiative around that.
I have a question for both Aaron and Taraun. What if someone was on this call, this is their first time hearing some of this information, what's one thing you think they should take away from this conversation we've had tonight?
Ron, I'll let you go first.
Oh, okay. So, there's a couple things I would, and that we talked about a little bit. Keep your eyes open. As women, we have a critical eye anyway, but I ask you guys to narrow the scope of your vision when it comes to things like this. I think now that you're equipped with some things to look out for, some red flags, the subjective language, the comparables, the older, the weaker ties to comparables, you know what to look for. So have a keen eye when it comes to that. And again, listen, I'm not trying to increase my workload, to be honest with you, but get an attorney. It is a real it's an effective investment, right? I really would say and it could range anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500. It could be one of the best investments you make in terms of buying your home. You are investing a ton of money on purchasing a home. It takes little of that, less than 1% or so to really invest in a attorney to walk you through this process, to be the eyes and ears for you so you're not walking in it alone. I get so many inquiries on helping people on the back end, right? At that point, the damage is done to some extent, right? Now we're playing cleanup, and now you're paying a premium to play cleanup. So do it on the front end, get someone who's going to walk with you. I started my business with doing these things for free for my
Mhm.
neighbors and my friends and my own purchases and things of that sort. So, if you have a friend, have that person take a look. Make sure that you're getting some second eyes on it, If you have someone that's an attorney, nudge them, lean on the shield, ladies. If Aaron's in that sorority, lean on that shield. Ask Aaron to take a look at some things. So you have a ton of resources at your disposal, but use them, right? And I think the more that we get educated on these issues, the better that we can address them as they come along.
Now, Taraun's trying to get me in trouble. No, I can't.
I'm just
I'm
saying.
confused. I mean, not officially, Taran, what are you talking about? So a couple things I would say, which is, I'm trying to jot it down because I know my memory. One would be to do an ROV. I know from personal experience that often it's a very time sensitive, stressful, personal when you're selling a home and all you want to do is sell that house and get the fair market value or get what you know that you deserve. And it's really debilitating when you get that undervaluation. And also, it's a changing market. It can be sometimes quick. And often people will waive that appeal or that ROV or that reconsideration of value. Often concerned, and I've had attorneys advise us like it's going to take weeks, it's going to take weeks, and it may. Taron can speak to that more than I can. It may take weeks for you to hear back from that appraiser. And often, I don't remember, Taron, if you actually explained the full ROV process, apologies, but often what happens when that ROV is requested, it just goes back to the exact same appraiser. Right. And that's a problem. Don't get me wrong. I have seen, however, oftentimes the appraiser increase and change the value. I've also seen the appraiser say, no, I'm standing still on this. But it's worth the try, I believe. What's 10 days? What's 2 weeks? And for some, it is not worth it because it's such a hot market that's just like, okay, let's keep on moving on. But for others, I think you should consider, is it worth the $60,000, the $100,000, or even the $10,000? Because often when it's undervalued, that buyer might have to walk away and you're back on the market anyway.
Yep.
So that's one thing. And then I think the other is what I already said, which is take action. In a time where we are exhausted by so many things in the world. Um, you know, figure out a way to respond to this within our community. I gave some suggestions. There's also an appraisal board, a very white male appraisal board. And they often have, and that's not the only board that we can sit on, but you could potentially try to apply for that board. They do have public seats. You may want to do that as I think there's other, I'm not going to go through the list, but there's a lot of different types of boards. We should be active in those boards as part of representation. And then the very last one that I hesitate on, but I'd like to be real. If needed, you can whitewash your home. And the whitewashing process, again, is removing everything. That may not change depending on where you live or where that home is placed, what location. It may not impact the value. If you're frankly in a Trenton, it may not. Who knows? But it may. And if you want to whitewash your home, you can do so. One point I did not get to make that I'm going to make here, and I know y'all asked only for one point, and I know that was intentional, Angelica, but often what we're seeing is what we have heard of is sometimes the overvaluation is occurring in neighborhoods too. So sometimes it's not just that our community is getting undervalued, other communities are getting overvalued. Or white homes are getting over appraised. So also be in contact with your alleged white allies in whatever way. Let them call them in, let them step up in all the ways that you can come up with, whether it's standing in at your home, talking about money that sometimes people don't like to talk about, all of that. Just do it because it is drastically impacting all of us. $60,000 turns into $500,000 after 10 years, 20 years. So that's all.
All right. Thank you both so much. We are so thankful that you thought it not robbery to spend this evening with us and to share this information with our community. And we'll continue to share this information outside of this. We did record tonight's session. So it is my hope that we'll be able to share this in a meaningful way to keep the conversation going. So I just want to extend thank yous for you both making time to join us this evening and for everyone that helped put this together this evening. We are very, very thankful for you all.
Thank you. Thank you for having
Thank
us.
you.
All right. Well, that is all we have for you this evening. Thank you very much. Everybody, enjoy the rest of your evening.
Bye bye.
Have a nice night.
Thank you, everyone.